Hello everyone and welcome to this video where we are continuing on the tutorial of how to make a modular engine microcontroller, except this time we're specifically looking into creating a car application microcontroller that's going to include other car related items such as the steering, the braking, and that type of thing. So follow along and let's get going. We're going to be starting off with the microcontroller that was made in the previous tutorial video. So if you don't have this one on hand, I do have a link in the description of my microcontroller that you could download and follow along or use in your creations if you put the proper credit that I request. So what you have here is a very simple with kind of my finger moving my fingers in quotation mark style microcontroller that will let you turn on an engine and throttle it up and down using this lever here, turning it off with the key button, and there you have it. So you can set the air fuel ratio and it runs. We went over the basic steps of how to make an engine, what to put, what sort of configuration would be useful for your engine, and that's why I have this over here to kind of show you how compact you can make it. This is an 8-cylinder engine with a supercharger on top, and this is pretty much the whole engine, including the radiator with the exception of the fuel tank and that type of thing. But this is everything that actually goes in the engine bay here. So if we open up this engine, you'll see that this is a V8 configuration with a supercharger, albeit it looks a little different because in this car I actually had to put the radiator up here because it was too low. I was making a car instead of a truck. But the point is, the engines are along these lines, and you can watch in the previous video how to make it up to this point. Inside the workbench, we're going to set it to be symmetrical in the x-axis, and we will start by making our sort of body for the car. Now, I know I released a video in the past with sort of this information, but that was first of all not for a modular engine, so it is still technically applicable, at least the beginning part is. But what I do want to make note to here, bring attention to here, is the fact that in this video I've made a few corrections that were pointed out to me that I did not catch as I was sort of developing it. So what we'll do is we will start with our piping system. You could use enclosed, you could use hidden, whatever is your preference, and you will put it like this. That will serve as the drivetrain for your vehicle. And then I'm going to search a wheel here, and this is actually what I messed up on the previous video. I had actually placed the wheels without the symmetrical tool here, and the reason for that was so they would steer in the same direction. The only problem with that is it was actually in the spinning in the reverse direction on one of the sides and causing a perpetual burnout that some of you caught. I made a comment and thanked you, but of course that is a error on my part and I'm trying to rectify it here. So anyways, in this case you check that in the positive direction all of your wheels spin as such, and you have your sort of drivetrain there. Now with that all installed, you can, and of course there's many different ways to style your vehicle. I mean, that is for your own sort of application. I'm not going to really show you how to go about that here in this video, but we could just do a very basic style of vehicle just to at least make it look somewhat like a car. But that is for you and you alone to determine the kind of style you like. Anyways, with that said, now we need an engine. So this is no good for us if there's no engine here, and we're going to start in the same type of manner that we did previously. We're just going to make a big platform for it here, and we'll search up modular. With modular engine selected here, I always start with the crankshaft. And the reason I start with the crankshaft is for the simple reason that that's kind of the framework of your engine. Then the next thing I do are the cylinders. Again, those are now depending on how many cylinders you want. In this case, we'll throw in a big old V8. And last but not least, on the front, we're going to throw on this belt drive. So belt drive will go on the front of the engine here, and on that belt drive is where we are going to attach all of our accessories. So that includes our alternator. Now we can turn off the symmetry tool here, so we have their alternator installed. We're going to throw on the starter on the other side here, and with that done, the last one we'll put on is the fluid pump, so to cool off the engine. Now we're gonna have to see how we attach them, but that's not really our concern yet. And then what I'm gonna do is put on a radiator. We don't know we need that. Someone asked me actually today if they need to have a radiator, if there's a way to like air cool your engines. There are people that got around to actually just making your engine run at such low RPS that it does not need to be cooled, but I always prefer to put an actual radiator. It just makes it much more efficient when it comes to cooling. So with that done, now we needed to go back to our modular engine here, and I always start with the coolant personally, just because the coolant is the one thing that can kind of mess up the format of the engine. So in this case, if we put it there, you could just attach a pipe to the front of the engine there, and as long as it goes through that pump, you have a full circuit. So that should be a full circuit of your radiator, and it doesn't even protrude from the bottom. So that is one part. Remember what I mentioned in the previous video, you'll have to have your 2-cylinder banks connected by a manifold. So in this case, we throw the manifold on just like that. Then you have a couple other parts. You have your air manifold that you'll have to put on, and that can go wherever you like. There's, obviously different configurations that you could put here, but we're just going to put it on the very front like that. And even there was different types of air intakes. You could put a ram air, you could put an air scoop, or just a simple air filter like that. So that is our air. Then if we go back to our modular engine, one thing we have to have is our exhaust. Now here you have a choice. You could have a straight pipe exhaust if you really want, going straight to the back of your vehicle and out the rear. So, but this is again up to you. You don't need to have you don't have to have an exhaust from each bank. I guess it'd be cooler if we make it come out of the bottom of the car, but again, style, you have a million different ways to style it however you want. That's the beauty of Stormworks. We're just talking about the basics here, so you can very easily have just one exhaust. And what I'll even do then is just, so we can put our seat on top, make this have, this style like that. This is not going to be a good looking car, guys, so don't really think about that too much here. What is going to be important is that, and that's going to be where our power comes out of. Anyways, with that done, now we have our exhaust, which again, do 1, do 2, do whatever. Then we go back and we for sure have to have the fuel manifold. Now the fuel manifold is a very important feature, so do not forget to put that fuel manifold, and that's going to have to be connected to a fuel tank. So if you have some space cut out for your fuel tank right away, that is where you're going to want to attach to your fuel manifold. Got to search tank here. So I'm just going to use a medium tank, and I'll put it in a kind of convenient place where you could easily attach it here. Now what you'll most likely want to do is put a T-piece or some kind of piece that has a corner like this, because right there we're going to actually put the hose anchor, so you could refill your car, and then attach this and attach the actual manifold. Now I guess I could even position it a little better like that if I want. Again, style points are not what's shown in this video. What's shown is how to create a basic working vehicle engine, and vehicle in fact. So if we go back to modular engine, you could see we've put almost everything now. The only thing that I know right now is missing for sure is the clutch. So that clutch is going to go right at the back of that engine, and you can see we've attached the 2 banks together, so that's important. We have our coolant, or our brakes, or we have our gas line. There we go. So that's right there. We have our air which is right there. We can't color that. And we have our coolant, which I'm going to paint blue. So we have all of our systems. Just for visual sake, actually, I'm just going to go ahead and put this and make it pink, just so you see the different areas. So pink is your air intake, blue is your coolant, red are your manifolds to connect your two banks, and green is the fuel there. So with these systems now in place, we can go back to our modular engine and see that we've now concluded pretty much everything needed for the small one. Again, we're not going to cover flywheels here. I'm just going to go ahead and put the clutch here and attach it to some accessories now. So this dual exhaust is really not necessary. I'm going to go ahead and scrap that for the simple reason that it's causing me some pain and grievance right now. And what I recommend you do is what I did in my vehicles is actually take the corner manifold, put it like this, and then run your exhaust on the underside of your car, just like in real life. And the nice thing is that your exhaust can actually cross in a pipe section, can cross over your RPS, and it does not impede your RPS whatsoever. You just can't make it go through some sort of you can't make it go through power switches like clutches and gears, but if it's a pure straight shot like this is not going to affect your RPS. And then this also gives us the benefit of having a nice cleaner vehicle. So what more importantly, it lets me have space now for the clutch. So we have this clutch coming out here. The first thing that I'd like to do once I come out of the clutch is put a cross piece or some form of piece like this, and on one area put a motor that we can then jump start our car, and on the other hand put a generator. Now yes, the generator is redundant because we have an alternator on the front, but I just like to put it anyways. It lets the clutch, like it lets this engine system pick up a bit of slack, so it's not going to run off on you if you don't have any sort of power lose. And if you don't have anything that consumes power on this end of your clutch, your engine, it may possibly kind of rev up forever because there's nothing for it to catch on. So I do like to put this, it catches on it. Alternatively, you could put a flywheel. Alternatively, you could do other stuff, including change the RPS. This is just the system I use. What I'm going to do is spawn in my famous rodeo. Here we have 6 gears. They're all going to change the ratio slightly, but in this example that I'm doing right now, we don't have to have that many gears. I just want to show you the basics, and then we can have a gear video after. But pretty much, let's just have 2 gears for now. Let's have them in the opposite direction. One of them is going to be to tune down our engine, or to make it a little, not to tune down our engine, but rather to change our gear ratio such that this car can go. We'll pretty much make the car stuck in perpetual first gear, and one of these is going to be the reverse gear. So with these 2 gears here in mind, you can now proceed with an actual clutch. And again, this is just the system I use. There are better ways. I'd never claim to be the best. I'm not a developer of the game. I just prefer this because then I can have my engine here rev up. It can go into the generator. That's how we can get sort of a generator mode, and then it goes through the clutch if we want to drive. So that's just the system that I use here. And after that, you can tie in with your actual main system here. Now again, I could have had I didn't have to have the exhaust join here. I could have it even join here. So it may be not the optimal system, but it doesn't really matter. The idea is to get our RPS into this pipe system, and once it's in that pipe system, it goes here, it goes here, it goes all over the place. Now again, if we put something here like a gearbox, just for your own information, that will prevent the exhaust from flowing. So as long as the exhaust line is a full straight shot out, it's not going to impede anything. Technically, exhaust will go into the system all the way up here unless we have a clutch or gearbox in this area, but it's not going to harm anything if we do it like this. I'm going to add a seat with the little steering wheel. We'll put that here. just like that. And I'm gonna put in my modular microcontroller that I made in the last video here, just because that is going to be our starting point, and we're gonna take that and sort of expand on it and make it sort of an all-purpose car microcontroller. So again, right now what we need to do is put a battery. Once the battery is located in the car, it can just sit right next to us. I'm gonna need to put a key because we have to have a function that turns the car on. So that will serve as the key. And I can just go ahead and connect all this stuff to the battery, or what I like to do is put a breaker somewhere, just because then if you're not using the car, you could actually turn it off. I'm just gonna make it constantly on for us here. And the nice thing is, hot side is A, I connect that to the battery, the rest can be connected to the rest of the system. But what's nice about this application or this type of thing is the breaker now is something that stays. So even if you delete the battery, you put a smaller battery, you put a different arrangement of batteries, you only have to connect the one battery to the breaker instead of connect the battery to all these different systems. So that's also a reason it just simplifies things moving forward. Now with our microcontroller here, we could put the key button on the key button. We could put the starter on the starter of the engine. The throttle goes in W of our seat. Then we have the battery connecting to the battery. The air intake goes into the air intake. Fuel manifold, RPS goes in the RPS of the engine. Electric motor will go to our electric motor here, and then the last one is the composite cylinder, which goes to the composite cylinder. Now if you're remembering something, we're actually forgetting to attach the RPS from the crankshaft to both our fluid pump and our alternator. And remember what I said about this clutch, you're better off putting a constant 1, because then you could actually jump start it, whereas if you don't put a constant 1, you're going to be using your electric motor trying to jump start the engine, but because this is 0, it's not going to be letting the power come into the engine and let it jump start. So if you put a constant 1, that means it's fully open and ready for you to put things in. Now the next thing I'm going to do here is test this out. Of course, with this clutch pressure here, we're not going to be putting any power to the wheels, but what I could do just as a little test here is put that clutch on my up and down arrow keys. Now in here, I just want to make sure that everything is on reset mode, and I can actually spawn this in and see what we get. So first things first, we got to have the engine start up. You can see that it's actually wanting to stall out, but I've now given it gas and it is going off on us. So the idle here is quite low. If I let it just sit and throttle, it actually is going to drop because it goes all the way down to 0. So that's something we have to keep in mind. This seat now is what's giving us throttle, and if the seat doesn't have any throttle, if it has 0 throttle, the engine will stall out. Of course, if I press W, it's actually going to pick up, and if I hold up the arrow keys, we've now given it power. So we've actually enabled the clutch sort of by our manual hand, and we've given it power through this seat. But of course, this is not how you can operate a car. So this microcontroller is fine in an application with a generator where it's just running at a constant throttle, whatever you set it to. But it's not so good when you're trying to operate a car, because that seat now isn't actually going to work the same way that a generator would. In addition to that, when we turned up our clutch, you could see that the gears here are not tuned properly, so the car was straining and struggling, and it lost a lot of its RPS when I put it in gear, so we will have to adjust these ratios. But let's first work on the microcontroller. So again, we have the modular engine microcontroller. In this case, I'm going to call it a modular vehicle engine microcontroller. In this case, it is intended for a vehicle, so it's not just your run-of-the-mill generator engine ECU. Now with that said and done, we can add a couple nodes. We're going to add a lot more nodes moving forward, but for now we can just make it quite simply the nodes that we need. One of the ways that we can connect the seat, if you recall, is either by connecting the W, the AD, all these axes, or we could just simply connect it to the composite of the seat, and that's actually going to enable a couple of easy ways to access the information we need here. So if you take a look at what this says here, it says that the W and S is value 2, the A and D is value 1. Really, those are the two ones that we're going to need for now, and I'm going to utilize that. Even my vehicles don't have that. I'm going to tell you right now, the microcontroller that I've developed for the longest time now does not use that. It just uses a simple W and S function to operate, and truthfully I know that that one works quite well, but you're still going to connect some things to it. Like in my case, I have a brake warning, I have the trailer microcontroller, so you still could use them, but for simplicity in this case I'm just going to throw on the seat here, and we'll just expand the size of this thing. We're going to have to make it a bit bigger here for sure. And if I go and find that seat microcontroller, I can move it here and start to work on the things. So the first thing that we need to do with this seat microcontroller is convert it into non-composite, or channels that we could actually use. So the first one is 1, which is our A and D, and 2, which are W and S. So just to keep track of things myself, I'm going to put a tooltip here, and I'm just going to label this channel 1 is A/D, and I'm going to delete these after, but let's just put them here for now, W/S, just so I can find out and have a quick access to what these are. You also could make it as a property text. It really doesn't matter. There's different ways to do it. All I'm doing it is just keeping track of what it is. I don't have it memorized personally. So anyways, we have now our seat, and we have our A and D, and we have our WS. So our A and D is actually our steering, and our W and S is going to be our throttle, but it's not just our throttle, it's also our brake. Now, I personally don't like when the vehicles in this game, when you hold the brake, it turns into reverse. The reason I don't like that is because I've been driving real cars for a very long time now, and in my head you have to put it in a reverse gear. So holding S and it starts reversing, while fine in arcade games and Grand Theft Auto and whatever, in more simulator style games like BeamNG, they don't do that. You have gears, it's sequential, and I just prefer it that way. I prefer when I'm holding S, it's my brake. If I don't want to move anymore, I just hold S. Whereas if it starts moving backwards, so I know some of you prefer it the other way, that's totally fine. For me, it just makes more sense that way. So we could actually do that one. That one's quite easy to do. And all it is you take a threshold gate, and you say that if your 2 here is between the numbers of -0.1 and, or the lowest one is -1 and a high of -0.1, that means you're braking. And if you're braking, you want this to actually enable a numerical switch box that is going to turn on a value that you've set on your property slider for your brake. And it could be a maximum of 1, a minimum of 0.1, no need to have it 0. We could have it go up by a value of, actually I'm pretty sure in my own cars I don't make it more than even 0.8, 0.08. So we could just make it like 4 and minimum of, we'll just put 0, whatever, we'll let you have that fun. And it could be like this, or even smaller, 1 or 2. And then in this case, we could have it start off at 0.08. Now with this, I believe the only issue is it doesn't, yeah, see, it doesn't really have that sensitivity here. It doesn't have 2 decimal places. So that is one of those things. If I go to my vehicle here, we could see that my Max throttle is 0.7. My brake, yeah, see, 0.08. So we're not going to do it as a slider. I'm just going to make it as a value that you enter in. And that way, if you enter it in, you can make it as detailed as you need. So in this case, we'll put brake. And I'll have the same one. That I just find that works nicely for me here. So 0.08. And that is when you're braking, it turns on. So then what you need to have is another node. And it's going to be a number output for your variable brake. Now, one thing that I found in the game is if you don't have a very high brake number, like if you have a very small number like this, your car is actually going to continue to coast for a long time before it stops. So what I did is, in addition to this, I had it actually turn on a timer. And that timer is telling us if we hold the brake for more than a certain amount of time, you actually increase the pressure on the variable brake. So for that one, what I'm going to do is it's going to output an on signal when the timer is done. So outputs an on signal when the timer reaches its duration. So that is going to be this last one right here. Outputs an on signal when the timer reaches its duration, so TON. And I'm just going to put that here and say that if you're holding the brake for a set amount of time, then it does this. Now, another way to do it is to use the capacitor. So that you could set the capacitor such that if you're holding this for a set amount of time, then it's going to discharge. The only problem with the capacitor is it has a certain discharge time, which is not really what I want for the application. I want it to be on as long as it is being held. So outputs an on signal when the timer reaches its duration. And then it's going to continue being on is kind of the intention here. That's why I like this one. And what it's going to do is once you've held the button, timer enabled, is going to be once you held it for a certain amount of time. For that, we're going to take a constant number. One that I like to use is 2.5 seconds. So if you're holding the brake, meaning if it's between this range and this range for 2.5 seconds, then it will actually switch from whatever we're doing here. So this is off. It's going to switch into the on path of this, which is actually going to output a much higher number. So in that case, we're just going to put a constant number of 1. So in this case now, we are outputting a constant number of 1. Now we can test this system out really fast here. What I'll do is I'll connect this to my seat, connect this to the variable brakes. But in addition to the variable brakes, what I'm going to do is connect it to a dial that we could look at in the car and see what it is that we are holding. So if I connect this to the variable brake and we spawn this in, I can actually go to the car, look at this, and it says 0. Now if I press down, it's showing 0.8 and then all of a sudden 1. Now one thing that this system does not do, and you have to actually set, is WS has to be fully sensitive, 100% sensitive, and on reset. So this is throttle and brake. So with it being 100% sensitive now, the second I press it, so I'm going to press it now, let go now, press it now, hold, 1, let go, there you go, press, hold, it goes 1, let go, hold, let go, good. So the brakes are working properly, and you'll notice that system I use in all my vehicles, it just makes sure you stop when it is you want to stop. So that is the brake portion of the microcontroller. Obviously with composite channel 2, the more important one is your actual throttle. So I'm just going to move this all up here. Down here is our steering. We're going to deal with that in a second, but if you are not pressing -1, or if you're not pressing between this range, you want to be giving your car throttle. You want to be holding W. For the throttle path, we're going to also start with a threshold gate connected to the W and S function. This time it'll have a high of 1 and a low of 0.01. But so really anytime it is in the positive direction, you're going to want to enable this. Now with that said, I put a numerical switch box and have it enabled when we turn the car key on. So the brake works no matter what, but I only want the numerical switch box here to be on when this is activated. So it's these two things. So it's going to be an AND function between having it positive and having the key on. That is what I'm going to attach to my numerical switch box. So you could see now when the car is off or when you're not pressing the gas, this goes to 0. This being the actual throttle, so that is being this value here. So we're going to take our W value and set this to be on. So when we are between these values and when we have the engine on, then it goes through this path. Now the next thing will be a clamp. And to be honest, the clamp now is going to serve a purpose in a sense that it's supposed to keep our engine on, because remember how I said it stalled out because it was not getting any throttle. So we have to have an idle. We have to have the engine kind of hanging out at an idle speed, and that is going to be defined. Now if I scroll down in the microcontroller and find the throttle that I previously used here, you could see that it is attached to a couple things. It's attached here to this function, it's attached to this off here, and it's attached to this one where we can actually set a manual throttle. Obviously for the car here, I don't really think that we're going to be having a manual throttle, so that's the generator mode. However, what we're going to have to do is bring this throttle node into our seat. Now what we're attached to here is this generator mode, so if we have low battery, that's fine, we could leave that even. And this one here, which multiplied 0.8 with the throttle in order to cool off the engine. So that's kind of that safety factor that we put into it. So all three of these can be directly attached to what we've developed here. Remember how I said if the engine is on, we need it to not stall out? Well, right now what we have here is not a complete system for that. So what I'm going to do first is actually add another numerical switch box, because regardless of if we are pressing anything here and the engine's on, we need the motor to not stall out on us. So that even goes before this all. So what I'm going to do is take a numerical switch box here, and it'll be irrelevant what we're putting on W or S, it's just going to be attached to the key on. So if the key is on here, then what we're going to do is take whatever it is we're putting through W, so on, and clamping that down right now. So that's going to be clamped, and it's going to be at a minimum of, let's say we're going to use a value of 0.05 for now, and a maximum of 1. So that is now what our engine's going to be throttling. Let's just take 0.1 and see what happens. So we'll have it at 10% throttle when we are just idling, and then of course if you decide to give it gas, that will then check the mark here. So it's going to now say, okay, we are also thresholded, so we're going through this, and the engine's on. So then in that case, this value is going to go connect to that one. Now yes, we're having a double argument, like we're having this, so we don't even need to have this one here again. We could just connect it to that and bypass it like that. So it just happens such that if the engine's on, then sure, all this. If the engine's on, because we're going on this on path and we're also pressing the throttle up, we're pressing W, it's going to switch onto this. So now remember, we could attach this to our nodes here. So we'll attach it here, we'll attach it here, and we will attach it here. So the throttle now, this old throttle, can actually be removed. This now should get us an acceleration on our motor. So if I spawn it in here and attach everything. So you can see we've added the seat, which is fine, the seat's there, and we've added this variable brake, so we've not added anything else. I still want to make this dial here with an attached node to my throttle, because I'm quite curious of what my throttle is going to be outputting. Now remember, we don't have a throttle as such. We instead have the air intake and the fuel manifold. So we have those two things as kind of our throttle out. But one thing to keep in mind is we may need cruise control and other functions that are actually going to rely on a throttle out. So I am going to showcase that as a number output and put it somewhere where we can easily read it. So in this case, this is our throttle output. It's not going to test our brakes anymore. Previously, we were looking at our variable brakes. Now we're just looking at the actual engine throttle. And keep in mind, this is a useful one to have. Again, like I said, if you have microcontrollers like the HGS system or anything else that requires your throttle, that may be useful. Alternatively, that one also may require your brakes. So keep in mind that now I've separated into two paths, whether you're putting your throttle or your brake on. But if we spawn in the car and take a look here, you can see when the car's off, this should read 0. Okay, if I turn the car on, so it doesn't work. I'm holding 1 and it's working, but not working properly. Currently we're having a logical issue here, so what I'm going to do is bypass the whole clamp altogether and put that directly on the path of the throttle. So that's fine if it's always at the idle. Realistically, it's only going to be on if it is on that. When you do turn the key off, however, we have to make sure that the throttle doesn't get affected. So right now, and also you see here, we're just attaching it purely into the throttle. We have to get it into these guys down there. So first things first, we know that if we turn the key on, we go from a 0 path into this throttle path here. Then next, here we have the second numerical switch box, which pretty much checks if we are in the positive or not. That prevents us from holding negative and this possibly revving up. So we want to make sure that it only gets engaged when it's in the positive. Now, if it's not in the positive, this is off. And if the engine's off, this is off. So the worry is by putting a clamp after this fact, you're going to also have a path where you have the engine constantly being not wanting to turn off, right? So to prevent that, doing that, what I can do here is try to put the clamp on another numerical switch box. You can tell I love my numerical switch boxes. Guaranteed there is a better way to do this, but it's fine. So what we do have is our clamp going through here. If the engine is on again, what I want it to go is in the positive and be this minimum value. And that is all I'm going to attach now to these lower areas, including that one. I guess I connected the wrong one. This should be here and this should be there. All right, this is what we'll try. Sitting in the car, it's showing 0. So I've turned it on. You could see that 0.1 is not enough to keep the engine at a nice idle. So now you have two options. Either you can play around with that throttle value on the clamp, maybe try 0.25 and see if it works and keeps your car at a nice steady idle. So you can see here it is, but now it's also taking off on us. So that is not ideal either. You don't want to have unlimited sort of power, and that's what I said. It is useful to have this here generator, but it seems that 0.25 is too much and your engine is almost like a runaway diesel. It's just kind of going at it. So then again, you could keep reiterating, keep retrying, keep doing this 0.5, 0.12, whatever, or you can make a PID controller that will actually control the amount of throttle during your idle. So if you take a look up here, we had that clamp. What we're going to do is put two things. We're going to make a property number where you could set your idle RPS, and we're going to take this PID controller with these values. So 0.02 for the gain, 0.0005 for the integral gain, and two zeros and 1 for the derivative gain. We're going to connect this to the set point, and we're going to connect active to the key. With that done now, we're going to have a process variable, which will be our actual engine RPS. So we have to go and find where we left that off down here somewhere probably. And once we find that RPS right here, I also do like to sometimes extract these and put them kind of like in the beginning so you can quite easily tell what's going on. But anyways, we're going to connect the RPS here to process variable, and then we are going to have this attached to something else. So what's going to happen, this value coming out of this is going to be the minimum throttle that you want on your engine, so you don't need the clamp anymore. What we're going to now put instead of that clamp is a function. We're just going to move this off to the side, and we're going to put a function with numbers, and it'll be a clamp that on the low end, on the X value, is whatever is the minimum. On the middle and here, because remember we're putting a clamp, so we're clamping this value here between 0 and whatever it is we want our maximum engine throttle to be. So we can also put that on here and set it like this, call it max throttle, and it can be 1, but you can also set it to be less than 1 if you want. And that's what is going to go into our throttle gate when the engine is on here. You could see that it's auto adjusting now. It's auto adjusting the actual throttle, and it's auto adjusting this to constantly be there. If I press W, currently nothing is happening, so we're gonna have to look into that. But clearly this is working, and it's setting it to our set RPS that we desire, which is 10. So that is a good start on that for sure. One thing that we lost somewhere along the way is the ability to actually control our throttle, which is here. And now you don't even need this minimum threshold. Well, sorry, you need this threshold, you don't need the clamp, which we removed, so that's fine. And what now we have is this throttle value that's coming in. Now the throttle value coming in here has to be attached somewhere. If we go into this, you could see that the way clamp works is it clamps X within Y and Z. So we're clamping it between 0 and Z. Obviously this maybe is better to put it as 0.1 if you want. So that way it's always going to be clamped between that value. Because anyways, here it turns it off fully. But at some point we now have to also add our own throttle that's coming out of this to whatever it is we are putting out here. So what I'm going to try to do here is actually attach this to Y and then put this to be X. So whatever is coming in through our PID controller, add Y. And let's see if that works. Because if that works, that will be quite a simple solution for this. So let's turn this on. And that's going nicely here. It's cranking it up. It's going to hit that 10 RPS mark, and then this is going to turn down. You can see it slowly turning down, but if I press W, I've given it that extra juice, and then it drops down to 0.1, which is the minimum, and this slowly comes down, and then once it hits that 10, it should start turning back up, which it's not, so that's on the verge of stalling. You can see it's actually dropping down, so this is now been proven that it actually doesn't work. So it only works the first time I start it up. Once I do this and let go, it's going to keep dropping, and it actually doesn't get caught anymore. It does catch it, but the PID needs some tuning. You can see here it's dropping, and once it hits lower, it starts to turn it up. So it goes and it drops to around 7, at what point this actually cranks up slowly here. With this new tune, you'll see if I turn this, it actually goes up quite high and then turns down. But once this hits that 10 mark, let's see what happens. So it's actually dropping and then it turns up. So that seems to work a little bit nicer. It's keeping us in the ballpark. Let's see if it goes below 8 even. No, it seems to be constantly holding on. If I add throttle and let go, it obviously goes down to 0.1. But then this one, once it hits that 10 mark, hopefully it starts to pick up here and keep the engine running at a smooth... Oh, we've dropped to 8. 7. Come on, pick it up. 10. Still 0.1. It's going to 6 even. So that's not great. 5. Alright. There, and now it finally turned up once it hit 5. So that's too slow of a reaction time. One thing that's bothering me is how long the capacitor's on. This is because I had this working on a larger engine that needed to be held on longer. So here we could put it to 0.5 seconds for the capacitor for the starter. And over here I played with the PID controller and set it a little differently here so we can test out these types of values. You'll see that it'll start up and it'll rev up just like a real car. So it kind of revs up right away, which is nice. And it sits at that 10 and it should rise and fall and keep it at that 10. So hopefully we don't see it dropping. Now the one thing is, we kind of throw the whole thing out of sync when we give it additional acceleration. So it's not quite working just yet, but we're getting there. What I just saw happen here was this PID controller wanted to force me back to 10 RPS, so it actually detuned me right away. So that's the one dangerous bit with having it like this with the addition, is that now this PID is actually fighting my acceleration and me wanting to accelerate here. So to combat that, what I might do is put an AND function and then say if the car is on and if my seat number 2 is 0. Because remember, if this is 0, that means we're at idle. We're not giving it gas, we're not pressing brake. Technically brake is still going to be important, so the low will be -1 and a high of 0 because we're not giving it any throttle whatsoever. That's when I want this on. Otherwise I want this off and I want the car to be able to accelerate and throttle up as I want. So let's try this. So it got up to 10. I can hold 1, and as soon as I let go of 1, this will drop to the minimum value. And then the RPMs also drop. And we'll keep in mind, once they get closer to that 10 value, they should also pick up. They shouldn't forever keep dropping and dropping. Now again, we're going to get that a little bit here before this decides to pick it up. So you can see here it's still 0.1. This is going to hit 6 soon here. And it's still not picked it up. Quite interesting the way that kind of lags. See, I don't like that. I think that's not too great, and that's what I did ended up fixing in the Mr. NJ microcontroller, and then I just adapted it into my own for my own vehicles, because you see here now it's dropping very fast, and finally it picked it up. So it had to drop to 5 RPS in order for my PID to even pick it up. So what I'm gonna do is force a little bit of, do a little bit of a play around here. And this is where these things start to look like spider webs and everything, because now we are doing other sort of, things. But what we can do is have this idle RPS as 10. So if the actual RPS is less than 10, so like in this case now, that means we've dropped below what we want it to be. We should find a way to kind of add a bit of power in and bring us up to speed, at least a little bit, or up to RPS. So that may counter this PID controller, unfortunately, but hopefully it also works to kind of boost us. Now what may be better, instead of putting the 10 here, is put a value less than 10. So like if we put a function, and I can say if it drops less than 8, because there's no reason. So that means if it's below 8, that means our PID controller hadn't even picked it up. So I don't want it to go less than 8. So if it's 10 or even 9, let's go with 9. So if it's x minus 9 or minus 1, meaning a total of 9. So if this is less than that, then we need to do something here. And that something can be to take this path, which is what we have for our PID, so the off or the on value. So the off value we'll put on this. The on value, we can add something ourselves. Again, not the greatest way to kind of overrun this PID. Maybe it's better to tune it, but I know I did something quite similar. So what I'll do here is I'll just put x, add 0.1. Let's try that. I know it was around 12. It wanted it to be around 12 in order for it to kind of be happy. So maybe we put even 15. Let's try 15. That should prevent us from dropping down below that. Oh, sorry. If we put 15, it's going to be at 0.1 at all times, whereas 0.12 is our idle. So maybe we only want it to be 0.5. Let's add 0.5 and see what happens. So now it should only happen if we are hanging out at an RPS less than 9. So of course the startup is fine, and then it kind of drops, and then at some point this thing should pick it up. You see that even this is going up, and this is also increasing, but it seems to throw it out of whack when we add acceleration, because when I add acceleration, this system kind of gets blown out of proportion, and then it takes a little bit longer to pick it up. So again, maybe tuning the PID is ideal, but let's just see what happens. So this is going to keep dropping quite fast, and once we hit that 9 mark, I need this to increase, and yet it did not increase, so that means it's not quite working just yet. But if I go in here, I did not have great success with that, so I'm going to delete all this actually. And the one thing I'm going to do now instead is go to my electric motor and set my minimum throttle or RPS for my electric motor to kick in and save the day. So in this case, I'll make it at 8.5. So if our throttle in this vehicle is less than 8.5, your electric motor is going to pick up. So you saw that that electric motor actually helped turn the motor on. And you see now that we're kind of rolling, it's hanging out at idle. Now if I give it a lot of throttle and let go, this is going to drop. And this is going to drop substantially until we hit that 8.5 mark, at what point this motor should pick us up. So here we are going to 10, 9, and 8.5, and then it'll hit 1 and it'll shoot us up, and it may have to kind of push us up a couple times. Now really you see that electric motor is saving the day here. Our PID is not doing anything, so it's not even picked up yet on the fact that it has to ramp up and get us to a good idle. So I don't like this either. It's constantly now relying on that electric motor to keep us going instead of the PID for the idle speed. So here, with some playing around, I was able to actually make this come active the second it goes under 10, and now our electric motor isn't even being activated. So you can see even if I throttle up and make it go up to 30 and let it back down, when it drops less than 10, it's going to be kind of like revving itself up. There you go. So it seems to now be holding that 10 mark quite nicely. Maybe a little rugged. Maybe sounds like it's like an engine that's misfiring. But if we ignore the fact that this is jumping like that, you could see that it's not dropping less than the 9. So that number, that seems to make me happy. You could see we put a proportional gain of 1, integral gain of 4 zeros 1, and derivative gain of 0.1. Now again, you can keep playing with this and getting different results, but I'll probably stick with this and start moving forward. This one may work a little better. It doesn't jump as drastically. So if I let it accelerate and let it drop back down, you're going to see as soon as it goes less than 10 here, it's going to start to play around that 13 mark. So that actually is perfect. This motor is not turning on, so this is only going to turn on if we really get down to like a low level. But this is now going to keep us on and happy. And the only thing I changed there was I put 0.5 for the proportional gain, left everything else the same there. And what I'm going to do is actually make this 8. So if the RPS is less than 8, or better yet, if I put a proper function, that way whatever we set in our microcontroller here will be, whatever we set as our idle RPS, it'll be 2 less than that. So x minus 2, and that's where I want the electric motor to kick on if we find ourselves less than that. Even less, even 4. Let's go 4. So if we put 4 there, you'll see that when I start up this car, this will actually turn on for a little bit, and it helps us get up to that idle RPS. And at that point, this PID takes over and it lets us idle close to that 10. So that is perfect. The next thing we'll want to do now that we have the motor running properly and kind of tuned into place is to add a clutch function that's going to control our clutch and make the car actually drive. So what I'm going to do is put a number output and call this my drive clutch. And the reason I call it my drive clutch is because it's not the one that's on the modular motor, it's the one that's forcing the car to actually drive. And I'm just going to find this function here. First of all, I'm going to move these so they're not blocking where I spawn my new nodes in, like that. Anyways, we're going to drag that up here. Now how the centrifugal clutches work that other people make is by using a function to multiply the RPS and get us a value that can be translated into letting our car drive. So depending on the RPS, we are going to be putting that into the drive clutch. So let's go first of all feed from our RPS and put it here just as a basic number. In this function, we're going to put 0.004 multiplied x to the square, or x to the 2. And this is sort of a starting point that others use for their microcontrollers when it comes to these clutches. But I kind of take this a little further as well. I don't want the car to be driving. I don't want this to be multiplying if we're in idle. Remember, we're in idle, we can't have the clutch enabled. So we have to put a numerical switch box, and that numerical switch box is going to pretty much determine what goes through here. So if the car is in idle, or if the car is less than whatever this value is, add 1. So same thing we did here, we did -4. In this case, I'm going to take idle RPS, so x, add 1. So if it is less than this, so idle RPS is less than this +1, and that should not be connected to my idle RPS, that should be connected to my actual RPS. So if my actual RPS, A, is less than x +1, so idle +1, then we can have this thing turn on, meaning the on value should be 0, or should be nothing, nil, going to the clutch. And then on that other front, if it's off, meaning if this statement isn't true, meaning if the idle or the actual RPS is greater than this, then it'll go to on, or off rather, and that'll go through here and into our drive clutch. Sorry if that was a little confusing, and sometimes I use this less than function, but I prefer to use a greater than, in the sense that I prefer to, when this thing is triggered, it goes in the on side of things. So in this case, we'll set this to be here. And what we're going to set now is if my actual car RPS is greater than idle +1, then turn on, then go through this function, then go to the drive clutch. So let's give that a shot. We have to make sure we actually plug in our drive clutch, no longer attach that to our seat, and kind of see what happens now. So before I drive, so it did boost us up a little bit, and the reason it did that is because the car, when you turn it on, it actually puts us at an RPS higher than the starting point. So what I do to counteract that is add another function here when this is going to be turned off, and it's going to be turned off for the first 1 second of you putting the key in. So we're also going to take this out, add another numerical switch box, make this be the on path, and then we'll put a timer. So we'll put a timer that outputs an on signal after it reaches its duration. So outputs an on signal when the timer is less than its duration. So that means it outputs off when it is on. So that's the exact opposite one of the one we want to use. We want to use TON, outputs an on signal when the timer reaches its duration. So in this case now, we've turned the key on. It's going to be 0 until this thing hits on, and at that point it's going to go transfer to that. So we're going to put this to the car key, and what I'm going to do is put a constant number, and it'll just be like the first 1 second even. So with that now added, if we go to the car here, you see, oh, it still pushed us. Anyways, if I add gas now, you can see that we're going. Now the gearbox is struggling, and so is the RPS. So we're now going to detune the gearbox a little. So I'm actually going to turn this gearbox around, facing the wheels, and we're going to increase the off ratio, let's say 2 to 1. And in this case now, first of all, get the gearbox going. Now yes, we shouldn't move a little. But you see here, we're accelerating nicely. Obviously now we're too high RPS. This is where you'd change gears. But you could see that it did get going. So I'm just going to spawn us back in. And what I'm going to do is change the time here to be 2 seconds. Now 2 seconds may be not good, because if you jump into your car and you want to get going right away, let's see, I'm pressing W and then it takes off. So that's no good. I was holding W as soon as I started the car and it took us that long. So 2 second delay is not a good thing. So another thing to do instead of this, which I actually think is not this, I don't like this system, because now if for some reason we're putting strain on our car and we end up dipping the RPS less than this, it's actually going to turn off this function and going to turn off the clutch. So I don't like this greater than thing here for the RPS. A much more logical thing to put here instead is a threshold gate for your actual drive wheels. So you see here that we have the brake, and down here we have the drive, and if it's anywhere between this, that means we want to drive. So I can put the same thing here and attach that to our W and S. So in this case now, if we are even at all pressing W, it is going to enable our clutch. So in this case, I probably don't need even the timer, because the timer was only something to prevent us from causing the car to move when we first spawned it in. So we're going to check this out. What I want to do is turn this car on and it not to move even 1 bit. Look at that. It didn't move. Now it's idle and it's running and it's getting caught by the PID. This isn't being enabled, so now we're pretty happy. And if I press W, now we're off. If I press S, we brake, and these should also fall back down to 10. Now I'm holding S as well, and we're not moving. If I press W again, we're off. Hold S, we stop. So that is a properly functioning system now, and again, it doesn't force the car to move when it's at a standstill. Though technically in real life, if you have an automatic car, you put it into drive, it will want to push you forward a little bit. You know, that's like at idle, it actually does roll you forward. I just tend to avoid that in this game, so you could actually leave your car in neutral. It's not going anywhere until you push the pedal. But if you do want it to act like a real life car, then you definitely don't need this function, so you can have it as soon as you put it into drive, your car is slowly moving. The reason I don't want that is because this car is going to be a manual car for the first part, and we're going to use the manual gearbox, so if we're in neutral, I don't want it to start to push us away. Anyways, that is now the starting procedure, the braking procedure, the acceleration, the idle, everything. So now what we need to do is the wheels. So remember, if I go ahead and put my A and D onto the steering here and the steering here and go and hold them, you're gonna see what happens. They face into each other and then they face out, like together. So that's not good. Anyways, I don't want even that to come into play, because what we're going to do is take a speed sensor, and I always put my speed sensor inside the engine bay somewhere here, because it almost looks like those power steering modules. So it kind of, and so I always look for them there because it just looks like a power steering module. It's easy for me to find. We're going to go in here and add a node for the speed sensor, and it's going to be a number input, and then we're going to have to add two more, one for the left wheel, one for the right wheel, and delete all this, make it a number output. So those are the wheel functions. We got to find them and set them up somewhere. I'll throw them down here for now, like this and like this. So what we know up here is this guy is our AD steering. Now we could remove the note because it's quite clear what it belongs to. And I'm going to take and drag this down all the way here. And it's going to give us steering. Now the least thing we can do is just put a function on one of them, and it's going to be like that with -x. And in this case, if I go and attach this to the left wheel and attach this to the right wheel, spawn the car in, hold left, and it turns left. So I actually got lucky. Hold right, it turns right. If it didn't work out the way I wanted it to, what I would have done is I would have just switched these around and made the -x go up here. But in the way we have it, this actually functions perfectly. There are plenty of good steering microcontrollers out there, so I recommend you use those, but a very, very basic one that we can make here would just involve using a clamp here, and you're going to clamp your X to -0.5 and 0.5, so just a very simple thing here. And where we're going to use the speed sensor is if we exceed a certain speed, we're going to reduce that even further. So what I do in that case is calculate out how much, let's say 100 kilometers an hour is. So if the speed sensor, and we could use a threshold here, so 100 kilometers an hour is roughly 27.7 meters per second. So if we hit 27 meters per second all the way up to 9,000 whatever, so if we are over 100 kilometers an hour, then we can turn this function on, or this thing on, and what would previously be off here would now just go through another function which will reduce it by, let's say, 0.8. So 0.8 or 0.7 multiplied by x. So what you get now is this goes into here, through here, and into that clamp. So it should reduce the amount you're steering and entering into there. Now again, you can tune this as you want. You can make it like 20, let's say, and you'll see it in your car when you're driving. But point is, once you hop in, if you turn, you get that, and it goes all the way to 0.5. Now maybe this is too fast, so maybe having this right now as 25 is too much. Let's try 17 or 16%, because again, we don't want it to go too fast. That seems a little more natural. So let's try driving. So you can see it turns, and then if you're going fast, that no longer, or well, I guess we weren't hitting that top speed mark here. You can see it still does go to 0.5, so we're definitely moving way too fast for that to be activated. So make sure that the linear speed is plugged into your speed sensor setting here, and then again, speed sensor thresholding low and high should go in here. Now what I guess is happening is this value is what, well, this is in the wrong spot. We should have this go into here, and then this go into this function, and this go into this function. So now whatever it is we've clamped, we actually reduce that by 0.7 and put that into here. So off, it is the direct number, on, it is the number from here, and then this goes into either this microcontroller or our right wheel. Make sense? Hopefully. So we drag this out here, we'll put this there, and then we do this little bit of switcheroo here, depending on our speed. So we were getting a higher speed, and then again in this case we can go the full 0.5. But if we start driving and this thing exceeds 20, now we only go to 35. See that? So 0.35. So that seems to be working much nicer there, and it gets us kind of where we need to be going. Now I know there are different ways to kind of have better steering, because if you see here I hold S and let go, it takes a while for it to come back because it was in that clamped area. If you remember me talking in another video about the clamped area, it's the fact that even though we have a clamp here, our steering still goes all the way to 0.1. So the clamp is only useful for our output, but not for our actual input of the values. But regardless, we'll just leave it like this for this simple microcontroller. And now you have a working vehicle. The next thing to do is purely aesthetic. So we can have brake lights. And your brake lights are activated whenever you are braking. So if we go up here, first of all, we got to make this be an output. And then we go here and we see that we find our variable brake. So variable brake is when we are holding this between this and this value. If it's between -1 and -0.01, it is braking. So we put that as the brake lights there. And then we are done for now. So I'm going to spawn this in. We'll add a very brutal brake light. And that brake light is just going to be two lights there that are red, just so you see how they function. Make sure that everything is plugged into our breaker and connect the brake lights to here. Now, in addition to that, what I highly recommend are a couple buttons. So we're just going to put simple toggle buttons. One of them is going to be your handbrake, and one is going to be your reverse. So the handbrake button literally just holds on to your handbrake on your wheels. And I'd recommend you start it off with default state on, and then this second button is going to be your reverse, and we will put that on our reverse gear, which I believe is that one there, -1. So when it's on, it is -1. That one does not have to be default on, but we do want to plug in our buttons to the breaker there. So now we hop into the car. You see that right now it's braking, so here it says brakes true. So even if you turn the car on and try to give gas, it'll stall out. So if you let go of this, then you can go. So that's your handbrake button. And then our reverse button, also the brakes. So if I hold S, it's braking. If I let go, it's not. So we're going, and I hold S, we brake. Now reverse, and you can see that's how the reverse works. So it just switches gears. You could rotate yourself around, turn that off, and off you go. So that is the basic vehicle using a modular microcontroller, and it's kind of a one microcontroller for the whole basic car, other than the transmission and other than accessories and things. That is in essence how to make it work. So thank you all for watching. Hopefully you learned something here with this weird looking contraption, and if you're interested in other videos including transmission and stuff just like what we have here, let me know. I may consider digging into that, but in essence, hopefully you learned something that is going to be useful for you in the game. Thank you for watching, stay tuned for more, and as always, happy Stormworksing everyone.